Hey everyone, welcome. It's podcast recording time. Glad to have you with me today. So, as always, pre-green room time before the podcast starts, we're going to talk pet insurance today. So, as always, feel free to pop in with comments and questions in the comments below, whether on YouTube or Facebook. They will show up there. I will pop them on screen and answer them as they come along. And we will talk again pet insurance today. So, let's jump in and start the recording. Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor and owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me today. I always appreciate you being a listener and a watcher if you're on the live video portion as well. So thanks so much. Appreciate it as always. So today we're going to talk pet insurance. So you may be wondering, you may be aware, of course, that this month is focused on short-term savings and emergency fund. And you're probably wondering, why am I talking insurance? That was last month. Well, stay with me. I have a reason for it. It's going to come back around and still focus on short-term savings here. So spoiler alert on that. So as always, if you're listening via audio on the podcast, you can always catch these at 1:30 p.m. Eastern via Facebook Live or YouTube Live on my page. And if you're here on video, hey, welcome in real time. Glad to have you with me. All right, let's talk pet insurance. So I've seen this question come up a lot, especially in online Facebook discussions or forums or just questions in general. People are often asking this question. It comes up quite a bit. And the question is pet insurance worth it? Or should I get pet insurance? So I'm going to go ahead and give you right out of the gate. I'm going to give you my answer, and then we're going to talk about it. The answer is no. I do not recommend pet insurance in most cases. That's kind of my bold upfront answer that I'm going to unpack a little bit for you. And I want to caveat this with, it is not because I'm anti-pet or anti-animal. I love animals. I've had pets throughout my entire life. We're likely going to be acquiring a dog in my family here in the near future. So I'm very pro-pet and pro-animal. So it has nothing to do with my opinion of animals. It's simply just the math and the risk factor involved of whether you should get pet insurance or not and what the alternative might be. So my answer is no. And let's talk about why. So let's kind of walk through my reasoning for whether you should or should not get pet insurance. And again, my opinion is no. So first of all, again, I get that, pets are part of the family. We all know this. They deserve medical care. They deserve health care. They deserve quality of life. They deserve the best we can give them to help them have a great life. And so we want to be sure we can cover their medical costs. Pets require trips to the vet on occasion, sometimes more than on occasion. Things can happen. Want to make sure they stay healthy and taken care of. So how do you pay for this? So pet insurance is popular because it kind of sounds like a good idea. People have major medical insurance for humans, so why not have pet insurance for pets? And it kind of makes sense if you just think about it on the surface and don't really, unpack it much. But here is why I do not recommend pet insurance. First off, there are certain types of insurance that I'm not a fan of because they are things you can easily self-insure. And when I say easily, I mean relative to other types of insurance where it's almost impossible to self-insure. There are certain types of insurance that, again, it's virtually impossible to self-insure, and I recommend always getting those things if they are appropriate for you in your life. One of those is life insurance. It's virtually impossible to self-insure in the same way life insurance would. For example, if you pass, then replacing your income or at least providing a lump sum to those you leave behind to help them is the idea behind life insurance. And it's virtually impossible to save up enough to do that until you're at least later in life. So earlier in life, it's one of those things that you can't really self-insure very easily. Also, it's virtually impossible to self-insure because you are literally replacing income that has disappeared due to a disability. So you can't really save up enough, at least earlier in life, to replace that. Major medical insurance, especially in the U.S., healthcare costs are astronomical. The medical bills people can, rack up through major medical events are very high. And without medical insurance, you can reach 6 figures worth of medical costs very quickly. And so medical insurance is a necessity for those of us here in the U.S. So those are types of insurance that the costs can be astronomical. The costs can be extremely difficult to self-insure, and it makes a lot of sense to buy insurance for those types of things. There are other types of things that are not as important to have insurance for, because they are more contained. The costs are lower. They are things that you can realistically self-insure. Short-term disability is one of those things. For example, short-term disability is, a short-term event. That's what your emergency fund is for. We've been talking about emergency funds and short-term savings here for a couple of weeks, and that's what your short-term savings is for, is to cover those short-term events. Now let's talk about pet insurance. Pet insurance, I would classify personally as one of those things that falls in the category of minor self-insurable things. So let's run some numbers first of all. Let's kind of unpack a few aspects of pet insurance. So Consumer Reports ran some data showing the cost-benefit analysis of pet insurance in various scenarios. And they ran some multiple scenarios, and on average, they showed a loss of between $500 and $700 over the course of a year over the course of a lifetime for a pet, when you compare the insurance cost versus the cost paid out of pocket to the vet. So what that means is you end up paying about $500 plus more in insurance premiums than you would have paid in veterinarian costs. So right off the bat, on average, the numbers aren't terribly favorable for pet insurance. You end up paying more for the insurance a lot of times than you pay for in direct medical costs with the vet. So that being the case, there's also some more data that is relevant to this discussion. One of those things is the chance of a major medical event in in a year's time span for a pet is about 3%. Obviously, there's always exceptions. There's, give or take, but in general, the average is about a 3% chance that you're going to have some sort of major costly medical event. This is not counting things like regular checkups and just the routine visits. We're talking like a major medical event, like an injury or cancer or something like that. So it's a pretty low chance of there being some sort of major medical event. Now, let's talk about the cost of a major medical event. Again, there's lots of variety. There's exceptions and variations here, but on average, the cost of a major medical event for a pet tends to be between $3,000 to $5,000. It's not necessarily astronomical as it could be in the case of a human medical event, which could obviously, again, we've talked about this before, it can reach six figures in medical costs due to the nature of how medical services are delivered in this country. So again, $3,000 to $5,000 tends to be a fairly average number or cost when it comes to a major medical event for a pet. Now, things can cost more. I think I've seen the numbers that, in the worst case scenarios can reach maybe $15,000, $20,000 for things like cancer or major injuries or, chronic illness, things that are really, really major. And they're usually exceptions. So you can reach up into higher cost brackets, but still they are more contained than human healthcare costs would be. So again, with that average being a few $1,000s, the odds are in favor that you're not going to have, bankruptable types of healthcare costs with a pet. So that's a factor to consider as well. So the other factor to consider is that pet insurance premiums often increase as the pet ages, when you're more likely to need it. This is something that not everyone is aware of, but in many cases, the premiums tend to increase as time goes on, as the pet ages. So early, you might have a rate that is X, but then, 10 years later in the pet's life, it might increase to Y or Z, and you might be paying a lot more in premiums. And that's about the time you might actually incur more veterinarian costs because of the age of the pet. So that's something that you want to watch out for as well. So what do you do? Let's say you say, okay, I'm convinced, Michael, the pet insurance thing is not for me. Doesn't make sense. What do you do? Well, just like most other major expenditures that are self-insurable, you save up money for it. That's what your short-term savings is for. You can do it in a couple of ways. One is you can simply just put a little excess in your short-term savings and call it your pet emergency fund. So your regular emergency fund would be kind of the baseline. And then maybe you put an extra $5,000 in there, or save up to get an extra $5,000 in there that you label as pet emergency fund. So if there is a major medical event, that's kind of what's earmarked for that event. You can put more in there. You can keep adding to it over time and just kind of say, hey, I'm going to build a big, healthy short-term savings, and that's what I'm going to use it for. You can also set up a separate account. This wouldn't be wrong to set up a separate account that is maybe labeled as a pet emergency fund. Maybe you have more than one pet and it's collectively for all of them. Or maybe you label it with the pet's name and you just kind of mentally think of it as, this is my pet's emergency fund if something happens, or medical fund, whatever you want to call it. There's no right or wrong here. Personally, I would just keep a little extra in my short-term savings, knowing that I have the potential risk of a medical event for my pet, but it's up to you. So for me, having a one account for short-term savings is a little simpler for me. So that is how I would fund it. And here's the thing, the nice thing about self-insuring is that you keep the money if you don't need to use it. So the purpose of insurance is to transfer risk. So what that means is there are certain types of risk that are unreasonable for you to take on, for you and me to personally take on. I already talked about this before: life insurance, major medical, disability insurance. These are all risks that are extremely difficult and, well, risky for us individually to take on. It's extremely risky for me to play the odds and say, well, I'm not going to have health insurance because I'm just going to play the odds and hope I don't get sick or injured. Well, that's something you can play the odds on, but if you do get sick or injured, the cost can be astronomical. Same thing with life insurance or disability. Those are extremely significant risks to take on. But when you're taking on risk yourself for something minor, like a pet medical event, things that are contained enough to be self-insurable, that's a reasonable risk for you to take on, for you and I to take on personally and self-insure. So again, when you think about, a few $1,000s is typically the cost of a pet event, for a medical event for a pet. That's something you can save up for. It's not out of reach. It's something you can do. And here's the nice thing: when you compare the options, you come out more favorable typically when you self-insure, because when you're using pet insurance, you're taking those premiums and you're paying them to a company, and you're not going to get that back. If you have to use it, then yeah, you've gotten value from it. But if you don't have to use it, that money is gone. It's not yours anymore. It's gone to the insurance company and you don't get it back. If you self-insure, then you have that money available to use if you need it. But if you don't need to use it, then you've kept that money. It's your money that you retain and keep to use for something else or to have on hand. So you come out ahead by self-insuring if you look at it that way, when you get to keep that money instead of taking it toward or putting it out toward premiums. Here's another factor. So a lot of people will say, okay, great. So yeah, if I have like a few years to save up that emergency fund or short-term savings for my pet, that makes sense. But what about those years before I get there? What about the time before I get there? So a couple of ways to look at that. One is that's just a fact of, taking a risk. You may have to just kind of be okay with letting it build up and taking that risk on. But what's even better is, before you acquire the new pet, start saving now. Start putting aside that money now. Set up a fund or start building up your short-term savings higher, so that you are able to kind of prime that fund before you even bring home the pet. That way you've already got enough money in there that you've kind of started the process of self-insuring and gotten at least a lot or all of the way there before the pet even comes home. So that's a great way to start it, by just kind of preemptively funding that short-term savings for your pet before you even bring the pet home. Now, obviously, if it's a spontaneous, like, hey, we're getting a puppy today, like, okay, like you haven't planned ahead and you haven't gotten that funded, okay, just try your best to, maybe for a couple of months, slim down your budget, put a big chunk toward your short-term savings to build up for it, or just be aware that you may just have to use your short-term savings, your human short-term savings, if, in the minor event that something does happen with your pet, you may need to use that. So in general, pets are an expense. So side note here, if you haven't gotten your short-term savings built up to, let's say 3 to 6 months of expenses in there, if you haven't gotten to that point yet, you might want to wait on getting a pet. So if you're thinking of getting a pet and you're still working on your emergency fund, it's a great time to slow down and wait and build that up first, so that you're not disrupted by the potential for a medical event for your pet if your pet gets sick or injured or something. So these are all things to think about. But in general, my answer is pet insurance is typically not worth it because of those reasons I've kind of outlined and unpacked here. You're typically going to spend more in premiums than you actually have in costs. Insurance can increase as time goes on, which makes it an even worse deal. And it's better to self-insure because it's something that is attainable for self-insurance. And you get to keep the money if you don't need to use it, which in many cases will be the case. You won't have to use all that money for your pet's medical needs, and you'll be able to keep that money. So All great reasons to consider self-insuring and not getting pet insurance. So if you have questions about this or scenarios you want to talk over or just thoughts about what we've talked about today when it comes to pet insurance, send me a note. You can reach me at podcast@elevationfinancial.com. So as I mentioned, I told you it would come back around to short-term savings here. Hopefully you've seen how that has happened. So with that, I'm going to say thanks for joining me today. And again, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Send me an email if you want. And if you'd like to chat further and just book a more formal meeting on my website, which is elevationfinancial.com. There's a big button on the homepage. You can use that as always to book a complimentary money session, and you'll pop in your top 2 to 3 money questions and we can talk them over. And some of you have already been taking advantage of that and booking meetings and chatting with me. And it's been awesome to meet some of my listeners. So again, elevationfinancial.com, check that out. Have a great day. See you next time. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining me today. Podcast recording is a wrap. I didn't see any questions come in this time around, so I will hang out for like 3 more seconds or 10 more seconds to see if any comments come in. So pop those comments in right this moment so I see them if you want. And just a reminder that, again, my website, elevationfinancial.com. Reach out if I can help with anything. And I hope this has been a good discussion today on pet insurance. And hey, also send me pictures of your pets. So if you're interested, you probably have pets. So I'd love pictures of your pets as well. So podcast@elevationfinancial.com is a good place to send those. I'd love to see your photos. So with that, thanks as always for joining the video portion of Wealth Redefined today. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.